Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating piece of computing history brought up by Windows veteran Raymond Chen. It's all about the Windows 3.0 win-help paradox, and honestly, it perfectly proves how tech terminology is kind of like a living language. It shifts, it mutates, and it leaves these wild little ghosts in the machine. Let's get right into it.
To really wrap our heads around this, I need you to do a bit of mental time travel with me. I want you to completely forget everything you know about the internet. Forget Wi-Fi, forget the cloud, pretend it's 1990. You've just booted up your bulky desktop computer running Windows 3.0. You're working in a program, you hit a snag, and you open up WinHelp. Now, Microsoft officially called this an online help system, but here's the mystery we're going to solve today. How could it possibly be an online help system when that desktop computer had absolutely zero network connectivity? No way, right?
Well, to figure this out, we have to look at how drastically our vocabulary has shifted over the last few decades. Today, if you say something is online, you obviously mean it's connected to the internet, or at least a remote network. But back in the 1990s, the concept of hierarchical storage was still the big deal. Back then, offline simply meant your files were archived away, usually onto physical magnetic tape. If you wanted an offline file, it literally took time to retrieve it, because a physical tape had to be mounted and read. Online, on the flip side, just meant the data was immediately available, right there on your local computer's hard drive, ready to go.
And this brilliantly illustrates a massive semantic gap. Because you're probably wondering, if online didn't mean connected to a network, what word did they actually use? Well, if developers back in the day wanted to talk about an actual network connection, like hooking into a mainframe or a time-sharing system, they wouldn't say the system was online, they'd say the remote system was up. Officially, up just meant the computer was running at all, but since the entire purpose of a mainframe was to accept connections from other computers, saying a system was up effectively meant it was network accessible.
So the crucial point here is that when developers in 1990 said online help, they were making a completely different promise to the user than we'd make today. They absolutely weren't promising a connection to a web server. They were promising that the documentation was readily available directly on your hard drive, right the second you needed it. You didn't have to roll your chair backward, dig through a dusty shelf of heavy physical manuals, and flip to an index. The help was online in the sense that the computer had immediate, instantaneous access to it.
Now, at first glance, looking back from where we sit today, it seems totally ridiculous. It sounds like an oxymoron, online help that's available offline. But if we treat this like a logic puzzle, we realize the contradiction disappears entirely once we clarify our reference points. The confusion literally only exists because we're using one modern word to describe two distinctly different computing concepts.
Let's move over to the physical hardware and see how this builds. Picture that machine sitting on your desk in 1990. It's a completely isolated island. There's no Ethernet cable plugged into the back. There's no Wi-Fi card. It's totally severed from the outside world. Therefore, the computer itself is offline relative to other computers.
But the software itself, the actual help files sitting right there on the spinning platters of your hard disk, is instantly accessible to that isolated machine. So the noun we are actually talking about, the help documentation, is online relative to your computer. When you separate the state of the network connection from the state of the local storage, the Windows 3.0 WinHelp system actually makes perfect logical sense in 1990 terminology.
As commenter Oliver Atkins points out in the discussion surrounding Raymond Chen's original post, it's not that networks didn't exist back then. They definitely did. In fact, TCP/IP, the foundational protocol of the internet, was officially adopted in 1983, which was well before Windows 3.0 even launched in 1990. But mainstream consumer terminology is really stubborn. It took decades for the vocabulary of the everyday computer user to evolve alongside the massive shifts in underlying software and networking. It's just a great reminder that human language evolves way slower than our tech does.
Now, what's really interesting here is the intense developer nostalgia for that specific era of localized access. A user named Dave Zorpolp jumped into the comments to praise older systems like Visual C++ 6.0. He notes how back then you'd just pop in a CD-ROM for your offline online help, and the result? Incredible speed. He highlights how an ancient environment like VC++ 6.0 can load up, build a project, and be ready to run faster than modern web-connected environments like Visual Studio 2022 can even finish their startup splash screens. And that's not even factoring in the massive multi-gigabyte updates modern software constantly demands from the cloud.
Commenter Ron Parker adds another fantastic historical layer to this, highlighting how physical hardware captured this terminology transition perfectly. Think about the physical online button on an old piece of equipment, like an ASR33 teletype.
Pressing that button meant something entirely different depending on where the physical cord actually went. If the cord just ran across the room to a local PDP-11 computer, you were online in the old localized sense. But if that teletype was connected to a computer halfway across the country feeding you remote updates, you were online in the modern networking sense. It was the exact same button, the exact same word, but completely different realities based entirely on geography.
And surprisingly, as user LB notes, this original 1990 definition isn't just some museum piece. It still ghosts its way into the modern Windows operating system today if you know exactly where to look. If you open up a command prompt right now and use the Deployment Image Servicing and Management tool, dis-mm, you'll see commands like dism/online. In this context, /online absolutely doesn't mean connect to the internet to fix this. It means you want to apply changes to the operating system that is currently running and immediately active as opposed to an offline, dormant Windows image file.
In fact, commenter GL points out several other areas where we still see this legacy. If we look at file attributes and modern storage management, Windows still regularly uses the term offline to mean data that's archived away from the immediate local disk. You see it in developer tags like file attribute offline, used for placeholder files, or user-facing features like Windows offline files, or even cloud storage that labels local files as available offline, while remote files are online only. When you step back and really look at it, we are still essentially using the hierarchical storage language of the 1980s and 90s to describe our modern cloud architecture.
Which brings us full circle to Raymond Chen's hilarious modern irony regarding how we currently build and distribute software documentation. He wrote, "Of course, now that many systems have migrated the help files themselves to websites, you now have online help that is not available when offline." It's so true, right? We took a term that originally meant always available instantly without a physical manual, redefined it to mean hosted on a remote web server, and in doing so, we actually reduced the immediate availability of the help whenever the network drops out.
Because as commenter Amos Kevitz rightfully points out, this modern approach has a massive vulnerability. Today, when external links break, when web pages are restructured, or when remote servers go down, we as users are left totally stranded. We press F1 and we get a 404 error instead of an actual answer, which leaves us with a truly fascinating question to end on. When you consider the dead links, the server outages, and our absolute reliance on constant connectivity, was the 1990s version of isolated, instant, localized online help actually a much better system after all?